meeting, so Mr. Parks is going to join us as soon as he's done. So, Madam Clerk, can you please call the roll?
You're right on time.
I'm right on time. I thought the other clock must have been ahead. I thought it was late. Sorry.
I'm sorry, you want me to read
Two
item
members.
one?
I'm sorry. We have two members of the committee, Mr. Blumenfield
And Ms.
and
Martinez?
myself, and Mr. Parks will be joining us shortly as soon as his committee. And so, Madam Clerk, can you please call item 1?
Item one is a controller report, actually two reports that have to do with the audit of payments to workers' compensation medical providers. This is under the city's contract with Eon eSolutions Incorporated.
Thank you. Do we have the Personnel Department? Can you come forward and provide a summary of the findings? Who's providing the summary of the findings? I'm sorry.
I believe the controllers,
The controller's
auditors are
office?
here
Okay.
if they want.
And I invited the
provide us
Personnel
some-
Department if you just want to join us. Is that you?
We're with control.
You're the controllers, you're personnel.
Correct.
Okay.
The auditors that conduct
Okay,
the
but
audit.
you can join us at the table if you want. But not on this side. Oh, sorry, I just thought you were going that way. Whenever you're ready.
There you go. Okay, my name is Will Norris. I'm a partner with the firm Moss Adams. I lead our healthcare consulting division, and I led the project that we're engaged by with the controller's office. This is Francis Orahudos. He's part of our team. He's a senior manager in the healthcare consulting group of Moss Adams as well. So just to get started, we appreciate the opportunity to work with the city on this project, and we feel like it was successful and mutually beneficial. And what I'd like to do to get things started underway is kind of go through a brief overview of the project, summary of the key audit objectives, the background, talk a little bit about the approach we took, and then Francis is going to talk about the results of the engagement and outcomes and conclusions. So Moss Adams, we are engaged by the City of LA to conduct an independent audit of Aon's bill review services. Primary objective of this audit was to ensure the accuracy and appropriateness of payments to medical service providers as reviewed and approved by Aon. Specifically, the audit evaluated the following. Payments to medical service providers were correct and in compliance with the state-mandated fee schedules, PPO rates, or other negotiated contract rates. Overpayments, underpayments, or duplicate payments did not occur, and expenditures were reasonable. So with that as kind of the overarching objectives, a little bit of background. City obviously self-insured for its workers' comp program, and it's managed centrally by the Personnel Department. The department administers civilian personnel claims and contracts out the administration of sworn personnel claims to TriStar third-party administrator. In July 2010, City began contracting with Aon for medical bill review and cost containment services for both civilian and sworn personnel. Aon analyzed all medical and pharmacy bills and provided maximum reductions for each bill. The City paid healthcare providers based on Aon's benefit determinations. Aon's bill review services included both standard and complex bills. Standard bills are those that were paid based on state-mandated fee schedules, PPO network rates, or other contracted rates, and complex bills, conversely, are those bills which were not paid according to a predetermined rate and which needed in-depth review or required additional medical information to price. As an aside, Aon's contract ended in June 2013. Probably goes without saying, this report only covers the audit of the workers' comp medical expense payments under the City of LA contract with Aon. A little more specificity to the project. The audit focused on payments made to medical service providers processed by Aon from the inception of their contract in July 2010 through January 2013. For the audit period, the city paid 469,826 bills, totaling $159,280,117 in workers' comp medical bills processed by Aon. So that's the scope of the population. So a little bit about the approach and methodology that was applied in performing this audit. We performed a statistically valid random stratified sample on population of bills paid during the audit period that I just mentioned. This resulted in a bill sample of 205 bills. For the standard review, as I mentioned, there are two types of bills in this population. We tested all 205 bills against fee schedules and other contracted rates, verified correct calculation of payment rates, duplicates, and that the system information matched bill submission. Now, for the complex review, there was a subset within that 205 bills. We tested 29 that met that criteria. And these, again, were not governed so much by a fee schedule, and their level of service required further review and additional information and clarification. And for our purposes, complex bills were identified as having specific codes or were of a high dollar amount, included medical documentation, and were certified by CID, who CID is a subcontractor for Aon for utilization review services. So with that, and again, happy to answer any questions regarding methodology or background. I'm going to pass it along to Francis, who's going to talk about the outcomes, results, and findings of the report.
Sure, very briefly. So for our overall assessment for this project, our audit identified that payments were not always in compliance with state-mandated fee schedules, preferred provider rates, or other negotiated contracted rates, which puts the city at risk of overpaying medical providers and incurring unnecessary workers' comp costs. Specifically, there were two major findings. Number one, that Aon did not determine the correct amount to pay medical providers for a significant number of claims. And based on our error rate that we concluded with, the total overpayment amount is projected to be $1,425,799. And that this overpayment amount could increase by an additional $303,768 if the same rate of errors is applied to the bill population over Aon's entire contract period, which was through June 2013. And also, an additional finding was from our audit was that we found Aon's performance measurements for medical bill review accuracy below what we observe as medical insurance and payer industry standards. Specifically, Aon's performance of percent of dollars paid correctly was a 98.13%, which is compared to the industry standard of 99%. And that the Aon's performance for the percentage of bills paid correctly, so this is the incidence of bills paid correctly, was 96.23% compared to the medical insurance payer industry standard of 97%. And our report contains 7 recommendations, and we understand that from the February 11th, 2015 letter to the personnel departments that we understand that the controller considers 7 recommendations implemented, while 5 are in progress or partially implemented.
Do you have any questions?
Yeah, a few questions. The auditor didn't review, as I understand it, 35% of the total population of the bills because of a conflict of interest with Moss Adams. Is that accurate?
Yes, it is.
And does that not skew the results? I mean, that seems very substantial, 35%.
Well, and this was brought up with the personnel department, the controller's department. We talked this through. Upon starting the project, we were made aware that there was a relationship with Corvell as a subcontractor, and we brought this to the attention of the controller's office that because they are also a client of ours, and again, we're already engaged in the project, that we would not be able to audit that specific subpopulation. So we carved that out and then performed a statistically valid random sample on what was left. Again, a subpopulation. And to your point, yes, it's whatever the percentage was.
Could the results be enough to skew? I mean, if you're talking about the difference, and it's a lot of dollars, but 98 point something percent versus 99%, and you're cutting out 35%, it almost makes the whole thing invalid. Is that accurate or not accurate, or maybe I'd ask the controller's office the same thing? And not to your any fault, I'm not saying that it was inappropriate to exclude them, because it sounds like it was fully appropriate. It just makes me question whether it was the right match to have a firm with that kind of conflict doing this kind of audit. And it's making me question the results of the audit, not because of inaccuracy of the firm, and I only know good things about the firm. I don't mean anything that, but just the nature of the conflict. And ask the controller if that should skew the way we look at this in terms of the percent and whether or not this was the best match for doing this kind of an audit.
It's for Controller's Office. We discussed the portion that relates to the client. We excluded that from the population. The testing that they perform is just for that remaining population. The result they have is for that population does not apply to the section they have excluded.
Right. I guess I understand the methodology. I understand why it was done, and I don't dispute that it should have been done that way. But I guess now looking at the overall audit, I'm questioning the utility of the audit if such a large percentage is excluded. Kind of as accurate as the audit may have been, it's sort of garbage in, garbage out. If you don't have the full percentage, you're going to get a skewed result, and so it makes me question the whole audit.
Yeah, and should this conflict of issue, shouldn't that be taken into consideration when we award the next RFP?
Well, these are the audits whether they have some.
I know, but when we go through this process again,
Yeah.
shouldn't this issue of conflict of interest be taken into consideration when you're issuing another RFP for this process?
For the audit
Oh, no, you're, okay, I'm looking at, sorry.
For the audit process, we always consider conflict of interest. If there is a significant conflict that cannot be remedied, yes, we would exclude that contractor from proceeding any further. In this case, there were remedies that we can exclude that portion related to their conflict from the population being audited, and they concentrate on that portion only, and the result they have is sticking to that portion. And the 1.4 million is a overweight billing for that portion only, not related to what has been excluded.
Right, but if the excluded company is, the best of the bunch, then the accuracy, then it would have been a much different number, would have been the overall performance rate by the auditor. Similarly, if the excluded group were the worst of the bunch, it would skew it even worse. So I'm not sure why, even though you could exclude that subgroup, why the controller went ahead and didn't exclude this contractor from doing this work, because it seems as if the results are not as accurate because of that exclusion. Not that they weren't accurate on the group that they audited. I'm not questioning that. But when we look at the overall audit and we're comparing the validity rates of this particular group to other standards, the groups that we're comparing it to didn't suck out 35%. And now that I'm hearing it's one group that was the 35%, that makes me even more concerned. If it was a 35% and they were sort of spread across the spectrum, then it wouldn't matter as much. It would still matter, but if it's one group, they could potentially be much higher or much lower than the average, and therefore it makes the whole audit invalid.
The overbilling is an overbilling. They look at the population, they identify a 1.4 million overbilling. Whether they include the entire population or not, that number is still valid. That's based on the sample they did for the remaining population and identify the overbilling. The percentage of accuracy, that may or may not change depending on if they include the other portion in there. I don't know whether if you would have included, would that make any difference or not. But the overbilling would have remained the same regardless.
I'm not sure I understand that, because if the overbilling, if the 35% excluded, and I don't want to dwell on this too much, I'm just trying to get my head around it. If the 35% group, what is it called? The group that was Corvell?
Yeah.
Corvell. If they had a much higher overbilling percentage or much lower overbilling percentage than everyone else, then, and you had sampled 100% rather than, 70% or 65%, then the overbilling number, since it's a sample number anyway, right? You're not talking about actual overbills, you're talking about a sampling extrapolated to the overall group. It would have been a potentially very different number.
It could have been much higher billing amount. So if you include
or much lower. If Corvell was 100% accurate, then the number would have been much lower overbilling. If they were 50% accurate, then the number would have been much higher.
No, not exactly.
So to clarify, I think you're speaking to the second finding as it relates to the performance metrics. And I think to Farid's point, it may or may skew up or down depending on Corvell's performance. But as it relates to the first finding, that is pertaining to the population that was available for review. So we're speaking to the 1.4. That's only speaking to the available population of bills that we could review, not including Corvell. So that's where, whether Corvell is included or not in that first finding, that just adds to the population and adds potentially to the overpayments. But based on the overpayment rate that we found within the population for the available bills that we could review, the extrapolated number only pertains to the non-Corvell bills. Does that make sense?
Yeah, the percentage accuracy that you're referring to did not result in computing the overpayment. The overpayment was a result of a statistical sampling. They have an error rate confidence level applied to that population. Has no relation to 98% or 97% they identify. It could be an underlying reason for the overpayment, but the way it was calculated is based on the available population. Had we had the other population included, the overbilling would have been higher. It would not have been lower, because any underpayment, any provider that is underpaid, they either file a medical lien, they go to appeals, and so on. So the chances of underpayment is very remote. It's the overpayment that is the risk in here. So by even including the Corvell site, you would have had a larger overpayment. One of our recommendations to personnel is to take upon themselves to take a look at that population to see whether there are any other overpayments that they can identify.
Right, but in terms of the number, the number is useful in that it compared, like, what was our overpayment number? How much did we, 1.4?
$1.4 million.
$1.4 million.
With a potential of $300,000 if it grew.
Right. And that's extrapolated to the 70%. I mean, that's
yes.
Right.
So if you added another 30% to that to look at what would be the overall, assuming that Corvell acted as similarly to the other group, you would extrapolate, another 500,000 or whatever it is. So you're saying that 500,000 wasn't included in the number,
right?
Yes.
And that would either be 500,000 or 700,000 or 400,000, depending on Corvell's overbilling rate.
Yes.
But it's not. We can't accurately extrapolate Corvell's overbilling rate by looking at the 70%.
No, we are not doing that.
Right.
We are not doing that.
Okay. Now, I think I understand it all. I mean, doesn't mean I'm not concerned about it in terms of, and as the chairwoman mentioned it, when we go forward with this in the future, and we're choosing an auditor for our group, I would want us to make sure that we minimize the groups that are that are going to have this kind of conflict, because it does make the data less valuable.
Right, yeah, I couldn't have said it better, but there wasn't another auditor you could have chosen?
And no, this is a very highly specialized.
I understand that, but is there an
audit.
auditor that could have been chosen that wouldn't have had this conflict?
Not at that time that we
So
were choosing.
the list of auditors you had to choose from all had some sort of conflict?
And no, I mean, again, this is the area of the expertise. Not all of the auditors on the list have that expertise, medical peer review. So the firm that we had was pretty much the only firm available to do the audit at that time. And again, we properly excluded the portion that related to Corel. The result that you have is very valid in terms of the remaining of the population. Identify significant overbilling, and we have recommendation for personnel to look at the remaining portion, that if there is any potential for overbilling on that too.
Speaking of overbilling, have the overpayments been recovered, or what?
I believe personnel can answer to that.
Yes, Personnel Department is in contact with the City Attorney's Office and Aon's legal counsel to pursue the actual overpayments that were identified in the audit. Aon is disputing 6 or 7 of the actual audit findings, which would reduce the $108,000 overpayments down to closer to $41,000. Negotiations are underway to see if the city can pursue the extrapolated amount.
They're not trying to expand
Yeah.
the survey size or anything like that to.
At the current time, no.
And what's the status of the recommendations that have not been implemented yet, the other 5? You said 7 were?
This was the over recovery. I mean, recovery of overpayment is one that is pending, and then the remaining are in progress, and we accepted the status with one clarification on another recommendation that we recommended to add a supervisory type of review on complex bills. We clarified for personnel that that type of review is needed, but would prevent overbilling of similar in the future. And I believe they are thinking to include that as in part of the new RFP when they go out to hire a new contractor.
And did the department review the bills paid that were not included in the audit?
At the current time, no, council member. The ones that were excluded are from Corvell,
Got
which
it.
was the city's preferred provider organization. And as you've indicated, that those do actually go through a secondary review. And so potentially those could have had a better accuracy rate or potentially, a worse accuracy rate. But we would have to see about getting somebody to review all of those bills. Basically conduct another audit of those Corvell bills.
Additional questions? I think I heard you say, are we going to have performance standards on the next RFP? Performance metrics for the, Aon's, whoever replaces Aon?
And personnel can answer that. That's
Yes, council member, we will write in a performance standard in the upcoming RFP, but as we indicated in our response and also Aon in their response, for bill review in California workers' compensation, there is not a standard out there. So we would be basically putting this in the RFP process, and then bidders would have to basically make a business decision on whatever standard it is that we put in there and factor that into their pricing.
And of course, we could do a range type of thing where you're within the except plus or minus one degree, and that's all fair. And if you're above or below, then you have certain consequences. So that
Correct.
certainly would give me more comfort if we were to do something along those lines. Question about recommendation 1.4 will be implemented when the contract goes next to bid. Personnel Department expects it's going to increase the amount of contract. Will there be sufficient savings, do you think, from that recommendation to justify the additional scope of work?
As Fareed indicated, that they've come back and clarified the robust retroactive bill review that they're recommending, and it's not across the board. We were under the impression that they wanted all bills to go through a secondary bill review, which would be probably cost prohibitive. And, so what we'll look at is having complex bills go through a secondary bill review process through the recommended vendor.
And then, I don't know if this is appropriate for this form, but I mean, the bigger question here is the workers' comp, how much it's costing us. And it seems as if, compared to other cities, we have 17 per 100 employees. The county has 11 cases per 100 employees. I'd be interested in how our audits can look at that bigger picture issue and figure out, are we talking about, do we have somehow less safe working conditions? Do we have more generous administrators? Do we have a problematic workplace culture? What is it that's causing LA to have the higher rate for workers' comp cases? And ultimately, the policy question is how do we fix that? But the audit question is, how do we identify that?
Personnel department is going to be working with an outside contractor to look into those areas, council member, because as you indicated, there's a number of factors that can be driving this, and whether a like-for-like comparison with us against the county or any other entity, you really have to make sure that you're comparing apples to apples. But we will be engaging a contractor to look at, our benefits, the composition of our workforce, to see if we can identify any type of drivers in those areas.
Controller is also in the process of finalizing a series of workers' comp audit that will be coming shortly, and would discuss some of the issues that you brought up.
Right, because obviously this is a very significant issue for the city and for our workforce, making sure that they're safe in their workplace and everything else. So this is something that has real, as I don't need to tell all you all know this has real impact, and so I look forward to working with you on this. One other very quick question. I noticed that the audit covers non-sworn, controlled agencies, LAWA, the port, everyone basically except DWP. Why don't we cover DWP? I mean, they're proprietary, but
DWP administers their claims in-house through their own claims administrators.
so do we have any sort of check in terms of how we do compare to DWP?
We've not compared ourselves, but we could look into that. But again, it's the
Very
composition of the workforce is very, very different, with linemen, et cetera, versus us.
When you look at us, we have 14,000 sworn employees, where there isn't a city around, even back in New York, that has that many sworn employees. And that's our main cost driver, is police and fire sworn.
No more questions? All right, so I'm going to go, if there's no objections, I'd like to note and file. But I would not want to reiterate again. I don't want to see a performance audit be performed with an auditor that has expressed a conflict of interest when reviewing our bills. I think it skews the process, makes it difficult for us to figure out to get an accurate picture of what's really going on. Thank you.
Council members.
So with no objections, Madam Clerk, I'd like to note and file this item. And can you read the next item into the record?
The next item is also controller reports, and this has to do with the performance audit of the workers' compensation claims management for fire and police personnel under the city's contract with TriStar Risk Management.
Good afternoon. I'm Barbara Steelman. I'm with the Controller's Office Audit Division. And on June 30th, 2014, we issued a performance audit of the workers' compensation claims management for fire and police personnel, for the sworn personnel. Our objectives, the primary objective, was to assess the effectiveness of the city's workers' compensation claims management for sworn personnel as performed by TriStar, who was the third-party administrator, or TPA, specifically to ensure overpayments did not occur and that work comp payouts were for valid claims in accordance with approved payment rates. The TriStar was in compliance with contract terms, and to evaluate personnel department's oversight and monitoring of the workers' compensation claims processing for sworn personnel. And finally, to ensure overpayments and duplicate payments did not occur when IOD or salary continuation payments terminated, and then the subsequent year of state rate temporary disability would kick in. As far as background is concerned, our audit scope was for fiscal years 2010-11 and 2011-12. Sworn employees account for the vast majority of workers' comp expenditures. In 2011-12, the city's work comp expenditures totaled $209 million, with more than $139 million, or 66%, related to sworn employees. Now, TPA has been used to administer workers' comp claims for sworn employees since 1999, and in November 2007, TriStar became the city's TPA for police and fire sworn employees claims. In May 2013, AIMS, or Acclamation Insurance Management Services, was contracted to be the TPA for the fire sworn employees, and TriStar remains the police TPA. The AIMS contract expires 2016. TriStar's contract expires in 2015. So as the overall assessment, our audit identified certain claims management practices performed by the TPA and the contract oversight performed by personnel required improvement. These practices put the city at risk for incurring unnecessary work comp costs and raises questions whether the TPA was fully meeting the city's expectations related to claims management and managing work comp costs. Our key findings included incomplete claims management practices and inadequate supervisory oversight, which put the city at risk for inappropriately accepting claims as compensable and possibly incurring unnecessary costs. This includes a 3-point contact that needs to be made between the employer, employee, and the physician, tracking subrogation referrals, and monitoring fraud referrals. Another finding was inadequate bill review processes may have resulted in city incurring unnecessary costs by paying for unauthorized medical care or paying more than mandated discounted fees. For example, the medical treatment authorizations, some did not have the utilization review authorizations or the examiner's approval. Some payments were keyed in by the TPA and bypassed the approval process through AON. And then lien settlement payments may have exceeded the recommended pricing. We also noted that the city does not have a medical provider network, or an MPN, as our peers do. So we saw that San Diego, Long Beach, San Jose, San Francisco, and the County of LA all have an MPN. MPNs provide better medical control through improved communications with medical providers and facilitating employees' return to work with or without work-related restrictions. In addition, an MPN would enable the city to require employees to use the city's pharmacy DME program, which generally provides lower costs. Another issue was personnel not developed formal guidelines or policies regarding keyed-in payments that would benefit the bill review process, high-profile claims, which may have special handling for medical expenses, or its own contract monitoring function. Personnel management had not ensured that all management reports to monitor TriStar's performance could be generated and were provided and included meaningful, accurate statistics. Personnel's process to review and approve TriStar's invoices did not ensure that all potential deductions for penalties were considered, which may have resulted in TriStar being overpaid. City did not have a fully integrated claims management system to help manage work comp claims and disability payments. Our audit found 28 recommendations, and in November 2014, based on Personnel Department's response, we considered 17 recommendations as implemented, 8 in progress or partially implemented, and 3 recommendations had not yet been implemented. Thank you, council members. Do you have any questions?
Do you want to go first? Has the personnel department provided verification of the changes made to the key-in payment as discussed in the audit? I think it's recommendation 3.1.
Yes, it's a new procedure.
So you have?
Yeah, and it was almost done
Immediately?
immediately,
Okay,
even before the audit came out.
okay. And has the department also, have you provided a target date on the action plan for management approval? I think that's recommendation 3.3. On the approval of the medical treatments and payments, I think you were asked for target
I'm
date.
thinking she's referring to utilization review. We
Yeah.
have a fully integrated managed care program with extended networks, and nothing is dispensed with, our contracted networks do not dispense a product or a service without it being authorized beforehand. When it gets out of our networks and it goes, to another provider, the adjusters, the TPAs, depending on if it's something they can authorize in-house or it has to go to full utilization review. But there is documentation in the claims file that whether it was authorized or not. And it's a lot more fluid now that we implemented the new claim system, iBoss. We were using a 35-year-old system, Lynx, which really had minimal functionality at all.
I think I was referring to more, the department needed to provide a target date about when the action plan was going to be completed. That's what I'm referring to.
I believe most of all we have implemented, except for possibly two that we don't agree to. We are in the...
Sorry, Councilmember, for the target date for the utilization review and making sure that it's approved, yes. When we went live with iBoss, as Don mentioned, there's a much better process in place.
That was my question. Okay. And do we have target dates for implementing recommendations 4.1 and 4.2?
Yes, Councilmember, on 4.1, this is the statistical reports reference so that we can better manage the TPA. Again, with our new claim system, iBoss, where we went live back on May 27th, we're able to produce a number of statistical reports that the TPAs have to report on in monthly meetings that we call work comp stat. So that one was implemented with iBoss. With regards to the fraud referrals, again, this is something that we can implement with iBoss, but there is a confidentiality issue here about how you need to document potential fraud referrals in the system so that they aren't subject to review by an audit. And so what we're looking at there is implementing a new, what we call a notepad, which would have security on it so that when we do refer something over for a city attorney to investigate, it'll be documented in the claim system.
In your report, you were mentioning that TriStar may have been overpaid. Is there a probability or a number or a way to quantify that a little bit more?
No, they didn't really have procedures. That was a reconciliation between what's generated, and it had to do with penalties that are made because the TPA doesn't do things according to a certain time frame, and there's a negotiation, if you will, process that goes on between TriStar and the city personnel, city monitor, to determine who was really at fault on that particular item. It's typically the TPA, from what I'd seen, and my conversations with the personnel department. And so the reconciliation would then be on the coding, on the reports of when those payments get paid, either to the state or to the claimant.
There's no way we could go back and try to recover any of that. I mean, because it would take so much work to figure it out exactly.
Personnel?
We are working with TriStar. They have reimbursed us where they agree that the error was their fault. I think what Barb's referring to is a previous program before the reforms that came about where there was a bump up or bump down on whether you issued a specific notice to the employee. And we had previously been collecting the bump up if they didn't do the notice correctly, and they indicated that there's the potential that we should have been collecting the bump down in cost. And so we are working with TriStar on that particular issue. And as Barb mentioned previously, there was a number of reports out there that we used to reconcile this. Under IVOS, we're able to run one report, and we just have to reconcile whatever is on that report on a monthly basis.
I just want to state for the record that Mr. Parks has joined us. Thank you.
The IVOS thing sounds great. Like, that's going to help quite a bit, and it's 20 years in the making with the Linux system we were using, so that's great. You mentioned the medical provider network, that we don't have one. Long Beach has one, San Jose has one, San Francisco has one. Are we going to get one here, or is that something that's disagreed with? What's the thinking and the process behind that?
In our upcoming RFP for bill review and managed care services, we will have the option in there and request that providers give us a medical provider network. A lot of advantage to a medical provider network comes from when you customize it, which means that you basically do a select group of vendors so that you can control that medical cost. Most MPNs that are out there right now is simply a preferred provider organization like Blue Cross, which the city currently has as its PPO provider. So we are realizing a lot of the benefits that you would get through an MPN by having Blue Cross as our PPO network. But we will look at either having an open MPN or potentially a customized MPN under our next managed care RFP process. Don, do you want to add anything else?
It also is going to be in the RFP is what's called a healthcare organization, which that gives you medical control for 6 months. But within that panel of treating physicians and such, you also have a case manager on every single claim, injured worker, to help that injured get them through the system. So that is going to be in our upcoming RFP along with the MPN.
And then last question about you said there were 2 items that you disagreed with. You could elaborate on the 2 disagreed 2 recommendations that you disagree with, and what the plan is for those recommendations, if they were significant.
Councilor, I don't believe we disagreed with any of the recommendations. I think what we said is that the medical provider network issue would be addressed in an upcoming RFP.
Okay. I misheard. I thought you said there were 2 recommendations.
I think I mistaked it on for the bill review audit.
Mr. Parks, did you have any questions?
No. Appreciate that. Very complicated work you're doing. Appreciate your effort.
Thank you for it.
Very true. And when are we issuing the next contract?
The,
You say the TriStar is up until when?
we actually currently have 3 TPAs right now, which is TriStar, they do police sworn, Ames, which does fire sworn and civilian, and then Acme, which has taken on about 1,600 of the civilian claims, which is police, civilian, city attorney claims, personnel department claims. Our RFP should be ready to go in about 6 weeks. Some of the TriStar's contract ends in November, and the other 2 TPAs end in April, but we're going to try to bring them all onto the same cycle.
Just based on the 2 items, it seems to me like we have, based on these 2 performance audits, it seems like we have some serious issues with some of our contractors. So I hope some of this is taken into consideration and perhaps not do business with them anymore. It's costing us a lot of money. Just pretty clear to me. If there's no other questions, or did you want to say?
No, just that historically, correct me if I'm wrong, there's not a lot of people in this business.
It's dwindling fastly, unfortunately.
So your RFP is only going to attract
Yeah,
a very small number of people. Most of them are the incumbents.
it's a very, very tough industry to stay current in. and it is dwindling.
So it makes our choices even tougher.
And because we're so big,
Yeah.
we're huge. We have 16,800 open claims right now.
In a perfect world, you would want to contract with someone who is looking out for our best interests as well.
Yes.
Okay, if I don't have, no cards? No public comments? Okay, thank you very much. If there's no objections, I'd like to move to note and file this item. And I move to adjourn our meeting. I don't see any. No cards, correct?
No cards.
Okay, so then I move to adjourn this meeting. Thank you very much.